November 20th, 1943. Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The pre-dawn darkness gives way to the thunder of naval bombardment as battleships Maryland and Colorado pound Japanese positions with 16-inch shells. In the lagoon, Marines of the 2nd Marine Division wade through chest-deep water, their landing craft grounded on the coral reef 500 yards from shore. Among them, Staff Sergeant William Bordelon of the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines grips his equipment bag containing demolition charges, while his M1911A1 pistol rides secure in its holster, already soaked with seawater, but mechanically perfect. The Japanese defenders, 4,500 strong under Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki, have transformed this tiny coral island, less than 3 square miles, into a fortress. Their officers carry the Type 14 Nambu pistol, the Empire's standard sidearm chambered in 8 by 22 mm. As the Marines struggle through the killing field of the lagoon, Japanese machine guns open up from concealed pillboxes. The unexpected low tide has turned what should have been a quick amphibious assault into a desperate wade through waist-deep water under murderous fire. What unfolds over the next 76 hours will demonstrate with mathematical precision the superiority of American small arms design, particularly the M1911A, one firing its devastating 45 ACP cartridge, over Japanese weapons that fail when needed most. In the close-quarters hell of Tarawa, where combat distances shrink to feet and inches, the difference between a 230-grain bullet delivering 370 foot-pounds of energy and a 100-grain projectile with barely 220 foot-pounds becomes the difference between life and death. The battles raging across the Pacific in 1943 reveal a fundamental truth that transcends mere technical specifications. The chasm between American and Japanese military sidearms reflects not just different design philosophies, but vastly different industrial capabilities, tactical doctrines, and understanding of what makes an effective combat weapon. The M1911A1 automatic pistol, firing the 45 automatic Colt pistol cartridge, represents the culmination of decades of American combat experience and industrial innovation. The Type 14 Nambu, with its underpowered 8mm round and fragile mechanism, embodies Japan's struggle to match Western military technology while lacking the industrial base and combat feedback necessary for effective weapons development. This disparity would manifest itself in every close-quarters engagement from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, where the thunder of the American 45 consistently overwhelmed the inadequate pop of the Japanese 8mm. The story of these two weapons is more than a tale of ballistics and manufacturing. It is the story of how industrial supremacy and engineering excellence determine victory in modern warfare. The genesis of the M1911A1 lies not in the Pacific, but in the Philippine jungles 4 decades earlier. During the Philippine-American War of 1899 to 1902, American troops faced a horrifying tactical problem that would reshape military sidearm development forever. The Moro juramentados, Muslim warriors who bound their limbs with leather to prevent blood loss and ingested native drugs to dull pain, launched suicidal charges against American positions. The standard Army sidearm, the Colt Model 1892 double-action revolver chambered in .38 long Colt, proved catastrophically inadequate. Colonel Louis Lagarde documented the typical encounter in his medical reports. Soldiers would empty their revolvers into charging Moros, placing multiple shots centre mass, only to watch in horror as their attackers continued forward to kill Americans with blade weapons. Lagarde's 1904 report described Antonio Caspi, shot 4 times at close range with .38 rounds, 3 bullets perforating his lungs, 1 passing completely through his body, who continued fighting until finally stopped by a rifle butt to the forehead. The .38. Long Colt's 150-grain bullet at 770 feet per second simply lacked the kinetic energy transfer necessary for immediate incapacitation. This failure prompted the most comprehensive ballistic study ever undertaken for military small arms, the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904. Colonel John T. Thompson, who would later develop the Thompson submachine gun, and Major Louis Anatole Lagarde of the Medical Corps were tasked with determining the minimum effective caliber for military pistols. At the Nelson Morris Company Union Stockyards in Chicago, they conducted tests that would be considered barbaric by modern standards, but provided crucial scientific data. The tests involved shooting live cattle and human cadavers with various calibers: 7.65 by 21mm Parabellum, .30 Luger, 9 by 19mm Parabellum, .38 Long Colt, .38 ACP, .45 Colt, 476 Ely, and 455 Webley. The methodology was precise, recording time to incapacitation for live animals, measuring body sway in suspended cadavers, examining wound channels through dissection and the newly developed X-ray technology. The results were unequivocal. Animals shot with .30 Luger showed minimal distress even after 10 rounds. Those hit with 9mm or .38 calibers showed greater effect, but often required 8 or more shots. Animals struck with .45 caliber rounds typically collapsed by the 4th shot, with immediate and severe physiological trauma evident. The cadaver tests revealed even more dramatic differences. When bullets struck bone shafts, the researchers assigned numerical values to body oscillation. The .45 caliber rounds consistently produced 2 to 3 times more movement than smaller calibers. The board's conclusion was absolute. A bullet, which will have the shock effect and stopping effect at short ranges necessary for a military pistol or revolver, should have a caliber not less than .45 inches. They noted that below this threshold, no amount of velocity increase within handgun parameters could compensate for insufficient bullet mass. John Moses Browning, already renowned for his firearms innovations, had been working with Colt on a .41 caliber semi-automatic pistol when the Army's requirements became clear. Browning rapidly scaled his design to accommodate a .45 caliber cartridge, creating what would become the Model 1905. The cartridge underwent several iterations between Colt, Winchester Repeating Arms, Frankfurt Arsenal, and Union Metallic Cartridge Company. The original loading, a 200-grain bullet at 900 feet per second, evolved into the standardized military load, a 230-grain full metal jacket bullet at 830 feet per second from a 5-inch barrel. The genius of Browning's design lay in its simplicity and robustness. The M1911 utilized a short recoil operation with a swinging link that lowered the barrel out of engagement with the slide during cycling. The single-action trigger provided a consistent, crisp pull. 2 safety mechanisms, a grip safety that must be depressed and a manual thumb safety, prevented accidental discharge while allowing rapid deployment. The 7-round detachable magazine could be quickly changed, and the pistol would fire the chambered round even without a magazine inserted, crucial when magazines were damaged or lost. The pistol underwent extensive testing from 1906 to 1911, competing against designs from Savage, Luger, and others. The torture tests were extraordinary, firing 6,000 rounds as rapidly as possible, accomplished in 27 minutes, dunking the heated pistol in water, mud, and sand between strings of fire. The Browning Colt design functioned flawlessly. On March 29, 1911, the U.S. Army formally adopted the automatic pistol, caliber .45, model of 1911. World War I combat experience led to refinements incorporated in the M1911A1, standardized in 1924. The improvements addressed soldier feedback from the trenches, a shorter trigger to accommodate smaller hands, scalloped cuts in the frame behind the trigger for better reach, an arched mainspring housing for improved natural pointing, a longer grip safety spur to prevent hammer bite, wider sights for faster acquisition, and a shortened hammer spur to reduce snagging. These changes, while seemingly minor, reflected the American military's systematic approach to incorporating combat lessons into equipment development. The .45 ACP cartridge itself represented optimized ballistic performance within practical constraints. operating at a relatively low 21,000 psi chamber pressure, compared to 35,000 psi for 9mm parabellum. The round prioritized reliability and barrel longevity. The 230-grain projectile's .45 1-inch diameter created a wound channel significantly larger than its caliber due to tissue displacement. At 830 feet per second, the bullet travelled just below the speed of sound, avoiding the instability that occurs during transonic flight. The heavy bullet retained energy well, maintaining lethal force even at extended handgun ranges of 50 yards. When America entered World War II, the M1911A1 production transformed from peacetime trickle to wartime flood, demonstrating American industrial might at its apex. Colt's Manufacturing Company, holder of the original patents and production expertise, immediately expanded production at their Hartford, Connecticut facility. But even Colt's maximum capacity, approximately 800 pistols per day by 1943, could not meet demand. The Ordnance Department, under Brigadier General Gladion Barnes, orchestrated one of the most successful distributed manufacturing programs of the war. Unlike the artisanal approach required for complex weapons, the M1911, A1's robust design allowed mass production techniques. Contracts went to companies with no previous firearms experience but strong manufacturing capabilities. Remington Rand, the typewriter manufacturer, received their first contract in March 1942. Their Syracuse, New York plant, retooled from producing typing machines and adding devices, ultimately manufactured 877,751 M1911A1 pistols, more than any other contractor, including Colt. Their production methodology revolutionized pistol manufacturing: extensive use of stamping instead of forging, automated checkering of grip frames, and statistical quality control that maintained tolerances while speeding production. Ithaca Gun Company of New York, traditionally a shotgun manufacturer, produced 369,129 pistols. Their innovative use of investment casting for small parts reduced machining time by 60%. Union Switch and Signal Company of Swissvale, Pennsylvania, a railroad equipment manufacturer, produced 55,000 pistols of exceptional quality, incorporating improved heat treatment processes that extended barrel life by 30%. The Singer Manufacturing Company's contribution, though numerically small at 500 pistols, demonstrated American industrial flexibility. These sewing machine manufacturers produced educational guns of such quality that they remain the most sought-after M1911A1 variants among collectors. Singer developed tooling and processes later transferred to other manufacturers, multiplying their impact beyond their direct production. Parts standardization was absolute. Any component from any manufacturer would function in any frame. Tolerances were deliberately loose, 0.003 to 0.005 inches in most critical dimensions, ensuring function despite manufacturing variations, field contamination, or thermal expansion. This interchangeability proved crucial when depot-level maintenance often involved assembling functional pistols from components of multiple damaged weapons. The ammunition supply chain matched weapon production. Frankfurt Arsenal, the Army's primary ammunition facility, produced over 1 billion rounds of 45 ACP during the war. Western Cartridge Company, Remington Arms, and Winchester Repeating Arms added another 2 billion rounds. Quality control was stringent. Every lot underwent accuracy testing, pressure testing, and function testing in multiple weapons. Specifications remained consistent throughout production. 230-grain bullet, 5.0 grains of powder, either bullseye or similar burning rate, producing 830 feet per second velocity plus or minus 25 feet per second. Special ammunition variants demonstrated American innovation. The M12 shot cartridge, developed for aircrew survival kits, contained 118 pieces of number 7.5 birdshot in a paper capsule, effective against small game to 10 feet. The improved M15 shot cartridge used a blue wax capsule for better moisture resistance. Tracer rounds for training allowed shooters to see their bullet paths. Proof loads, marked with stanic-stained cases, tested +P pressure resistance during manufacturing. The Marine Corps Table of Organization Evolution reflected combat lessons about pistol importance. In 1942, a Marine division was authorized 798 pistols, primarily for officers, NCOs, and crew-served weapon teams. By December 1943, after Tarawa, this increased to 1,377. By 1945, the authorization reached 1,707 pistols per division. The 1st Marine Division on Okinawa actually carried over 2,000 M1911A1s, with many riflemen acquiring pistols through unofficial channels. Distribution prioritized combat units. The 2nd Marine Division at Tarawa carried 1,456 M1911A1 pistols for approximately 18,000 Marines, 1 per 12 men. By Iwo Jima, the 5th Marine Division carried 1,789 pistols for similar strength, 1 per 10 men. Army units showed similar patterns. The 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa carried 1,234 M1911A1s among 16,000 soldiers. The Type 14 Nambu represented Imperial Japan's attempt to create a modern military sidearm, but its development history reveals the fundamental limitations that would doom it in combat. Colonel Kijiro Nambu, often called the John Browning of Japan, designed his first semi-automatic pistol in 1902. This Type A Grandpa Nambu superficially resembled the Luger with its exposed barrel and distinctive knurled cocking knob, but operated on entirely different principles. The Type 14, adopted in Taisho 14, 1926 in the Western calendar, evolved from earlier Nambu designs, but incorporated supposed improvements based on Japanese military experience in China. The pistol utilized a locked breech mechanism with a floating locking block, conceptually sound but requiring precise manufacturing tolerances. The 8x22mm Nambu cartridge, unique to Japanese weapons, fired a 102-grain bullet at approximately 1,065 feet per second from the Type 14's 4.6-inch barrel. On paper, certain specifications seemed superior to the M1911A1. The Type 14 held 8 rounds versus 7. Muzzle velocity exceeded the 45 ACP by 200 feet per second. The pistol weighed 2.03 pounds unloaded, nearly half a pound less than the M1911A1. Initial production models from Nagoya Arsenal and Kokura Arsenal showed excellent craftsmanship, with deep bluing and careful hand-fitting of parts. However, these surface advantages masked fundamental flaws. The 8x22mm Nambu cartridge, despite higher velocity, generated only 256 foot-pounds of muzzle energy compared to the .45 ACP's 369 foot-pounds, a 31% deficit. The lightweight 102-grain bullet shed velocity rapidly, retaining only 180 foot-pounds at 50 yards versus 300 foot-pounds for the .45 ACP. The bottlenecked case design, while theoretically aiding feeding, created extraction problems when chambers fouled. Japanese military procurement doctrine created additional complications. Unlike American forces who were issued weapons, Japanese officers were required to purchase their sidearms from their salary. A Type 14 cost 78 yen in 1940, approximately half a lieutenant's monthly pay. This economic barrier meant many officers received minimal training, viewing the pistol as a status symbol rather than a combat tool. Some officers, particularly those from wealthy families, purchased foreign pistols instead. Spanish ruby pistols in .32 ACP or inherited European revolvers were common. The Type 14's design philosophy reflected Japanese tactical doctrine that prioritized spiritual power over firepower. The Imperial Japanese Army's infantry manual devoted more pages to sword technique than pistol marksmanship. Pistols were considered weapons for executing prisoners, controlling subordinates and ritual suicide, not primary combat tools. This doctrinal blindness prevented recognition of design flaws that would prove fatal in combat. Manufacturing quality deteriorated catastrophically as the war progressed. Pre-war Type 14S featured 17 distinct inspection stamps, careful polishing, and hand-fitted parts. By 1943, inspection marks reduced to 3, surface finishing was eliminated, and parts interchangeability degraded severely. Late-war production from the Toriyamatsu factory showed tool marks, rough casting, and dimensional variations that would have failed pre-war inspection. The Type 14's most critical design failures centered on its controls and magazine system. The safety lever, positioned on the left side above the trigger guard, required the shooting hand to shift grip or the support hand to operate. Impossible when wounded, carrying equipment, or grappling with an enemy. The magazine release, a spring-loaded lever at the bottom front of the grip, often released inadvertently during handling, leaving the pistol unable to fire due to the magazine disconnect safety. The 1939 modification added a magazine retention spring, intended to prevent loss of magazines. This improvement made combat reloading nearly impossible. Magazines had to be yanked out against spring pressure, often requiring both hands. In tropical conditions, corrosion welded magazines in place. Marines reported capturing Type 14 with magazines frozen solid, hammered unsuccessfully in desperate attempts to reload. Production statistics reveal Japan's industrial limitations. From 1926 to 1945, approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols were manufactured across all arsenals and subcontractors. Monthly production peaked at 3,500 units in 1944, but quality was abysmal. The Nambu Rifle Manufacturing Company, Chuo Kogyo Company, and Tokyo Gas and Electric subsidiaries produced pistols with such poor quality control that parts from different manufacturers, or even different production runs from the same factory, would not interchange. The Type 14 Nambu's failures in combat weren't isolated incidents, but systematic design flaws that reflected fundamental misunderstanding of combat requirements. Each deficiency, perhaps tolerable in isolation, combined to create a weapon that failed catastrophically under Pacific combat conditions. The safety mechanism represented the most immediate tactical liability. Located above the trigger guard on the left side, the safety lever required either shifting the firing grip, losing sight picture and trigger finger position, or using the support hand. In close combat where milliseconds mattered, this two-handed operation proved fatal. Marines reported numerous instances of Japanese officers futilely attempting to disengage safeties while being overrun. The M1911. A1's ambidextrous safety, operable with the thumb of the firing hand while maintaining grip and trigger position, could be disengaged while drawing from the holster. The magazine disconnect safety, intended to prevent accidental discharge with the magazine removed, transformed into a critical vulnerability. When magazines were damaged, lost, or frozen in place by corrosion, the entire weapon became inoperable. Unlike the M1911A1, which would fire its chambered round without a magazine, the Type 14 required a functioning, properly seated magazine to operate. In the coral sand of Tarawa or volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, where magazines were easily damaged, this feature rendered countless Type 14s useless. The Type 14 lacked a slide hold open device. When the last round fired, only the magazine follower held the bolt open. Removing the magazine allowed the bolt to slam forward, giving no indication the weapon was empty. In combat, shooters discovered empty chambers only when triggers clicked uselessly. The M1911A1 slide lock, activated by the magazine follower, held the slide open after the last round, providing immediate visual and tactile indication of an empty weapon while speeding reloading. Extraction failures plagued the Type 14, particularly with deteriorating ammunition quality. The bottlenecked 8x22mm case, theoretically superior for feeding, created a smaller bearing surface for the extractor. Combined with wartime ammunition using corrosive primers and inconsistent brass, cases stuck in chambers or ripped through by extractors. The straight-walled .45 ACP case, with its larger bearing surface and lower pressure, extracted reliably even from fouled chambers. The recoil spring assembly, a complex dual spring system, required precise manufacturing and maintenance. When springs lost tension, accelerated by tropical heat and humidity, cycling became erratic. Failure to return to battery was common, requiring manual slide manipulation. The M1911A1's single recoil spring, even when weakened, usually maintained sufficient function for combat effectiveness. Tropical conditions revealed additional vulnerabilities. The Type 14's tight manufacturing tolerances, acceptable in Japan's temperate climate, became liabilities in the Pacific. Thermal expansion from 115 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures on Peleliu caused actions to bind. Monsoon humidity on Guadalcanal created rust that froze mechanisms within days. The M1911A1's deliberately loose tolerances, derided by target shooters as sloppy, allowed function despite thermal expansion, corrosion, or contamination. Field maintenance presented insurmountable challenges. The Type 14 required tools for disassembly, a luxury unavailable in combat. Complete disassembly involved 34 separate operations and risked losing small springs and pins. The M1911A1 field stripped without tools in seconds, depress recoil spring plug, rotate bushing, remove recoil spring and guide, push out slide stop, remove slide and barrel. Reassembly reversed the process. Marines could field strip, clean with whatever was available, including urine when water was scarce, and reassemble blindfolded in under 30 seconds. Ammunition quality compounded mechanical failures. By 1944, Japanese industry struggled to maintain consistent powder charges and primer compounds. Captured ammunition tested by American ordnance units showed velocity variations exceeding 200 feet per second within single lots. Squib loads left bullets lodged in barrels. Subsequent rounds created catastrophic failures. Excessive pressure rounds from double charges cracked frames and bulged chambers. American .45 ACP ammunition maintained remarkable consistency throughout the war, with velocity variations rarely exceeding 25 feet per second within lots. The true test of these weapons came in the desperate close quarters fighting that characterized Pacific Island combat. On Guadalcanal, during the Battle for Henderson Field on October 24th to 25th, 1942, Sergeant John Basilone's actions demonstrated both the M1911A1's effectiveness and the seamless integration of American weapons systems. While Basilone is famous for his machine gun defense, witnesses reported his extensive use of his M1911A1 when Japanese soldiers breached the perimeter. Private First Class Nash Phillips, wounded in the battle, later testified, "Basilone had a machine gun on the go for 3 days and nights without sleep, rest or food. He was in a good emplacement and causing the Japs lots of trouble, not only firing his machine gun but also using his pistol." When Japanese soldiers penetrated the line during hand-to-hand fighting, Basilone's M1911A1 proved decisive. Each 230-grain hollow-point bullet, Marines often modified ball ammunition by cutting crosses in the tips, delivered immediate stopping power. Phillips described seeing Japanese soldiers knocked backward off their feet by Basilone's pistol fire. The Japanese assault on Henderson Field involved approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Sendai Division. Marine defenders numbered fewer than 700 along Basilone's sector. The Japanese achieved local numerical superiority of nearly 5-1, necessitating maximum effectiveness from every American weapon. In such circumstances, the difference between the .45 ACP's immediate incapacitation and the 8mm Nambu's lesser stopping power multiplied across hundreds of individual engagements. At Tarawa, Staff Sergeant William Bordelon's actions, though primarily involving demolition charges, included critical moments where small arms made the difference. Bordelon, an engineer with the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines, landed in the assault waves on November 20, 1943. His amphibious tractor took numerous hits, killing all but 4 of the Marines aboard. Bordelon's mission was to destroy Japanese pillboxes with demolition charges, but approaching these positions required suppressive fire. After placing charges on 2 pillboxes, Bordelon was wounded by machine gun fire, his demolition charges exhausted. Marine combat correspondent Staff Sergeant David Dempsey, who witnessed the action, reported that Bordelon grabbed a rifle and continued fighting, covering other Marines as they moved forward. While accounts focus on his demolition work, the close-quarters nature of the fighting meant pistols were constantly employed. Bordelon's M1911A1, like those of all Marine engineers, served as his last line of defence while placing charges against enemy positions. The Type 14's combat failures were equally well documented. On Tarawa, Marine Private Robert Sherrod, a Time Life correspondent embedded with the 2nd Marine Division, witnessed a Japanese officer's desperate struggle with his Nambu. The Jap officer was screaming at his men, trying to shoot his pistol. He kept pulling the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun was jammed. Sand, maybe, or a bad magazine. A Marine shot him with a .45 from maybe 20 feet. The Jap flew backward like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Similar accounts proliferated across every island battlefield. On Saipan, June 15, 1944, during the massive Japanese Banzai charge that became the largest of the Pacific War, Marine Corporal John D'Alessandro of the 27th Marines described close combat in pre-dawn darkness. They came at us in waves, officers in front waving swords and pistols. I saw one Jap officer trying to clear his jammed Nambu while running toward us. He was working the action frantically when I shot him with my .45. One shot sent a mass and he went down hard. The .45 would stop them cold. The impact was like hitting them with a baseball bat. The mathematical reality of stopping power became apparent in after-action medical reports. Marine Corps medical personnel documented wound characteristics showing that 45 ACP hits to the torso created temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter, causing immediate blood pressure drop and nervous system disruption. The 8mm Nambu, with its lighter, faster bullet, created wounds barely larger than its caliber, often requiring multiple hits for incapacitation. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, commanding 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Guadalcanal, noted in his after-action report, "The .45 automatic pistol proved invaluable in repelling Japanese infiltrators and Banzai attacks. Multiple instances were observed where single rounds from the .45 immediately stopped attacking Japanese soldiers, while enemy officers armed with their issued pistols failed to inflict casualties even at close range." The disparity between the M1911A1 and Type 14 Nambu reflected fundamentally different military philosophies shaped by distinct cultural and historical experiences. American doctrine, forged in the frontier wars and colonial conflicts, prioritized firepower and individual marksmanship. Japanese doctrine, rooted in samurai tradition and Yamato Damashi, Japanese spirit, emphasized spiritual power over material advantage. The Thompson-Lagarde tests had provided American forces with scientific justification for maximum stopping power. The conclusion, that nothing less than .45 caliber would suffice, became dogma. This wasn't mere preference, but evidence-based requirement. The tests measured not just lethality, but immediate incapacitation, the ability to stop an attacker before they could close distance or continue fighting. The temporal element was crucial. In close combat, the difference between immediate and eventual incapacitation measured in American lives. American training reflected this emphasis on practical effectiveness. At Paris Island and Camp Pendleton, Marines fired thousands of rounds in pistol training. The course began with bullseye marksmanship, learning trigger control, sight picture, and breathing, then progressed to combat shooting. Marines learned to fire from retention position with the pistol against their ribs, point shooting without using sights, and engaging multiple targets while moving. The standard qualification required 70% hits on man-sized targets at 25 yards, firing 50 rounds under time pressure. The M1911A1's manual of arms emphasized combat efficiency. The Israeli draw technique, though not called that in 1943, was standard. Drawing while simultaneously thumbing off the safety, finger entering trigger guard, only when the muzzle cleared the holster and oriented toward target. Marines practiced malfunction clearances, tap, rack, bang, until they became automatic. They learned to count shots, reloading before the slide locked back when possible, maintaining continuous fire capability. Japanese pistol training remained minimal and ceremonial. The Imperial Japanese Army's training manual devoted 2 pages to pistol marksmanship versus 12 pages to sword technique. Officers received perhaps 50 rounds of annual training ammunition, when available. The emphasis was on precision shooting at stationary targets from formal stances, not combat effectiveness. Many officers arrived in combat having fired fewer rounds through their Type 14S than American Marines fired in a single training day. Japanese tactical doctrine viewed pistols as symbols of authority rather than combat tools. The weapon's primary purposes included maintaining discipline, shooting deserters or cowards, honourable suicide when capture seemed imminent, and executing prisoners. The idea of using pistols as primary combat weapons in assault seemed absurd when the warrior's sword represented his soul. This philosophical blindness prevented recognition of the pistol's tactical importance in modern close combat. American doctrine evolved continuously based on combat feedback. After Guadalcanal, training emphasized shooting from prone and supine positions, common when wounded or taking cover. After Tarawa, where Marines fought in waist-deep water, training included waterborne operations, keeping weapons dry during landing, clearing water from barrels, and immediate action after immersion. After reports of Japanese infiltrators in marine foxholes, training incorporated weapon retention techniques and contact distance shooting. The ammunition philosophy differed radically. Americans designed the .45 ACP for one purpose: maximum stopping power within practical constraints. Velocity was deliberately kept subsonic to avoid transonic instability. Bullet weight maximized momentum transfer. The round's rainbow trajectory at distance was irrelevant. Pistol fights occurred within 25 yards. Japanese 8mm Nambu development prioritized velocity and trajectory, seeking rifle-like performance from a pistol cartridge. This pursuit of inappropriate characteristics sacrificed stopping power for negligible practical advantage. Cultural factors influenced weapons employment. American individualism encouraged personal initiative and adaptation. Marines modified their M1911A1s with filed sights for faster draw, stippled front straps for better grip, and shortened triggers for smaller hands. Such modifications would have been unthinkable in the Japanese military, where conformity was absolute and initiative discouraged below senior ranks. The Japanese concept of bamboo spear spirit, the belief that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage, pervaded military thinking. When Chinese forces complained about the Type 14's inadequacy against Russian-supplied weapons, Japanese advisors responded that insufficient warrior spirit, not inferior weapons, caused failures. This denial of material reality prevented systematic improvement of weapons systems. American pragmatism demanded measurable effectiveness. The Bureau of Ordnance conducted continuous testing of ammunition performance, accumulating data on velocity, pressure, accuracy, and terminal ballistics. Feedback from combat units drove modifications, improved magazine springs after reports of feeding problems, harder extractors after reports of extraction failures, enhanced rust-preventive finishes for tropical service. Each modification underwent testing before implementation, ensuring improvements actually improved performance. The Pacific Theater provided the ultimate proving ground for weapons reliability, subjecting both American and Japanese pistols to environmental extremes that would have been impossible to replicate in peacetime testing. From the freezing Aleutians to the equatorial Solomons, from coral atolls barely above sea level to volcanic mountains, these environments tested every aspect of weapons design and manufacturing. Guadalcanal's climate represented tropical hell. Rainfall exceeded 200 inches annually, with humidity constantly at 100%. Temperatures ranged from 75 degrees Fahrenheit at night to 95 degrees Fahrenheit daily, but felt like 115 degrees Fahrenheit, according to marine accounts. Metal rusted overnight. Leather rotted within weeks. Wooden stocks warped and split. In this environment, the M1911A1's parkerized finish, a phosphate coating that absorbed oil, proved superior to bluing. Even when surface rust appeared, the pistol continued functioning. The Type 14's blued finish, beautiful when new, provided minimal corrosion protection. Surface rust appeared within days, progressing to deep pitting within weeks. Marine Armourer Sergeant Thomas Morrison, with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, documented maintenance challenges in his journal. The 45s need daily cleaning, but keep working even when they look like hell. We're using motor oil, gun oil, even coconut oil, anything to keep them running. The captured Jap pistols rust solid in 3 days. Their springs break when you try to force them open. We've got a pile of them we can't even disassemble. Tarawa presented different challenges. Coral sand finer than talcum powder that infiltrated every mechanism. The island's lack of vegetation meant no shade from equatorial sun that heated metal to burning temperatures. Marines wrapped pistol grips with cloth or tape to prevent burns. Water was critically scarce, 5 gallons per day for a battalion, making weapon cleaning impossible. The M1911. A1's loose tolerances allowed functioning despite sand infiltration. Marines learned to work the slide vigorously before use, allowing sand to fall through gaps. The Type 14's tight tolerances meant sand particles locked mechanisms solid. Peleliu in September 1944 recorded the highest temperatures of the Pacific War. Official readings reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit, but temperatures in fighting positions among the coral ridges exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Marines suffered more heat casualties than combat wounds on some days. Metal expanded significantly at these temperatures. The M1911A1, designed with thermal expansion tolerances, continued functioning. The Type 14, with precise peacetime tolerances, experienced binding as parts expanded differentially. Marine Private Eugene Sledge, with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines on Peleliu, wrote, "Everything metal was too hot to touch. We wrapped our rifle slings around our hands to carry them. Canteens burned our lips. My 45 was so hot the rounds in the magazine were warm to the touch when I unloaded it. But it worked, always worked." Iwo Jima's volcanic ash presented unique challenges. The fine black sand, actually pulverized volcanic glass, was highly abrasive. It infiltrated sealed mechanisms, accelerating wear exponentially. The island's sulfur springs created corrosive vapor that etched metal. After 5 weeks of combat, many rifles and machine guns required replacement due to bore erosion. M1911. A1 pistols, with their simple mechanisms and robust construction, maintained function despite accelerated wear. Type 14S suffered extraction failures as chambers eroded and cases stuck. The Aleutian campaign provided opposite extremes. During the May 1943 Attu invasion, temperatures dropped below freezing with 100-mile-per-hour winds. Lubricants congealed to tar-like consistency. Breath condensation froze on metal, creating ice that locked actions. The M1911. A1 functioned without lubrication. Soldiers learned to clean all oil from the weapons, running them dry. The Type 14's complex dual recoil spring system required lubrication to function, making it inoperable in extreme cold. Saltwater immersion during amphibious operations challenged both designs. At Tarawa, Marines waded 500 yards through chest-deep water under fire. Weapons were completely submerged for 10 to 15 minutes. The M1911A1, designed with drainage channels and minimal enclosed spaces, could be shaken out and would function immediately. The Type 14, with its enclosed trigger mechanism and complex internals, retained water that had to be disassembled to drain, impossible under fire. Monsoon conditions on New Guinea and the Philippines tested waterproofing. Rain fell continuously for weeks, making it impossible to keep weapons dry. Everything organic rotted: leather holsters, cloth, wood grips. The M1911. A1's plastic grips, introduced in 1943, were impervious to moisture. Steel parts required constant oiling but maintained function. The Type 14's wooden grips, especially on late war models, absorbed moisture, swelling until they cracked frames. The magazine retention spring, added in 1939, rusted in place, making magazine changes impossible. Maintenance supplies reflected different philosophies. American forces received abundant cleaning materials: bore brushes, cleaning rods, patches, CLP, cleaner, lubricant, preservative, and specialized lubricants for extreme conditions. Every Marine carried a pistol cleaning kit. Japanese forces, by 1944, often lacked basic cleaning supplies. Captured Japanese documents indicated units sharing single cleaning rods, using palm fronds as patches, and motor oil when gun oil was unavailable. Field modifications demonstrated American adaptability. Marines learned to polish feed ramps with emery cloth to improve feeding, relieve slide-to-frame fit with valve grinding compound to improve reliability, and replace recoil springs with springs from damaged weapons to maintain proper tension. Such modifications, performed at battalion level, kept weapons functional despite extreme wear. Japanese forces, lacking spare parts and modification capability, simply discarded malfunctioning Type 14S. The Battle of Okinawa, commencing April 1, 1945, represented the ultimate test of American and Japanese small arms in the Pacific War's largest amphibious operation. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, the invasion pitted 183,000 American soldiers and Marines against 110,000 Japanese defenders on an island that would serve as the staging area for the planned invasion of Japan. The 82-day battle would demonstrate with finality the superiority of American weapons in the war's most savage fighting. Okinawa's terrain differed radically from previous Pacific battlefields. The island stretched 60 miles long and varied from 2 to 18 miles wide, featuring open farmland in the north and rugged ridges honeycombed with caves in the south. Japanese General Mitsuru Ushijima had months to prepare defences, creating an elaborate system of interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified positions that would channel American forces into killing zones. This battlefield would demand close-quarters combat where pistols often determined survival. The American force included the entire 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., comprising the Army's 24th Corps, 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Infantry Divisions, and the Marines' 3rd Amphibious Corps, 1st and 6th Marine Divisions. These units carried over 15,000 M1911A1 pistols, nearly one for every 12 combat troops. Ammunition supplies included 10 million rounds of 45 ACP, reflecting lessons learned about ammunition consumption in prolonged operations. The Japanese 32nd Army, reinforced by naval troops and Okinawan conscripts, represented Japan's last cohesive military force outside the home islands. Officers carried Type 14 Nambus, but ammunition shortages were critical. Documents captured from the Japanese 62nd Division indicated an allocation of only 20 rounds per pistol for the entire campaign. By contrast, American forces carried 21 rounds per pistol as basic load, with unlimited resupply available. The initial landings on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday and April Fool's Day, met surprisingly light resistance as Ushijima had withdrawn his forces to prepared positions in the south. However, when American forces encountered the Japanese main defensive lines at Kakazu Ridge on April 9th, the battle's true character emerged. The fighting devolved into savage close-quarters combat, where distances were measured in feet and survival often depended on who could bring effective firepower to bear fastest. Technical Sergeant Beaufort Anderson of the 96th Infantry Division earned the Medal of Honor on April 13th during the assault on Kakazu Ridge. When his unit was pinned down, Anderson single-handedly attacked Japanese positions with grenades and small arms. His citation notes he eliminated 25 Japanese soldiers in close combat. Witnesses reported Anderson extensively used his M1911A1 when Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes at point-blank range. The .45 saved my life a dozen times that day, Anderson later stated. When they popped up from holes right under you, there was no time to swing a rifle around. The .45 knocked them down instantly. The Japanese conducted massive counterattacks throughout the battle, culminating in Operation 10 Go on May 4th, when Ushijima launched his entire reserve in a desperate offensive. During this attack, close combat became general across the entire front. Marine Private First Class Harold Agerholm of the 4th Battalion, 10th Marines, would receive a posthumous Medal of Honor for evacuating 45 wounded Marines under fire. Witnesses reported Agerholm carried his M1911A1 in one hand while dragging wounded with the other, firing at Japanese infiltrators who approached his casualties. Cave warfare on Okinawa created unique combat conditions that maximized the importance of pistols. The Japanese had transformed natural caves into elaborate defensive complexes with multiple levels, interconnecting tunnels, and concealed firing ports. Attacking these positions required Marines and soldiers to enter confined spaces where rifles were unwieldy. The M1911 A1 became the primary weapon for cave clearing. Marine Corporal Donald Honnis of the 1st Marine Division described cave operations. You'd throw in white phosphorus grenades to burn out the oxygen, then go in with pistols and flashlights. The 45 was perfect for this work. In those confined spaces, the concussion from the 45 was stunning. We'd put tactical lights, flashlights taped to the barrel, on our pistols. You'd see movement, point, and shoot. The .45 would blow Japanese soldiers backward into the cave walls. The technical superiority of the .45 ACP in confined spaces became mathematically quantifiable. In caves and tunnels, the .45's subsonic velocity meant less disorienting muzzle blast for the shooter while delivering maximum energy to targets. The heavy bullet's momentum carried through web gear and equipment that might deflect lighter, faster projectiles. Terminal ballistic studies conducted post-war showed the 45 ACP created larger temporary wound cavities in gelatin than any other military pistol cartridge, crucial when targets had to be immediately incapacitated in confined spaces where wounded enemies could detonate grenades. Sugarloaf Hill, a small mound that anchored the Japanese Shuri line, became the site of the most intense close combat from May 12th to 18th. The 6th Marine Division suffered over 2,000 casualties taking this single position. Marines attacked 17 times before finally securing the hill. During these assaults, combat often occurred at handshaking distance. Marine Sergeant James Stevens recalled, "We were fighting in the rain, in mud up to our knees. Japanese soldiers would emerge from hidden positions right among us. Your rifle would be clogged with mud, but the 45 always worked. I saw Marines and Japanese soldiers shooting at each other from 5 feet apart. The Marine with the 45 always won those encounters." By late May, the failure of Japanese small arms became critical. The 32nd Army's operations officer, Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, wrote in his post-war memoir, "Our Type 14 pistols had become almost useless. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and those weapons still functioning often failed due to rain and mud. American soldiers seemed to have unlimited ammunition for their powerful pistols, which could kill a man instantly even with peripheral hits." The monsoon season, beginning in mid-May, turned Okinawa into a mudscape, foxholes filled with water, weapons submerged repeatedly. The M1911A1's drainage channels and loose tolerances allowed it to function despite mud immersion. Marines learned to keep pistols inside their shirts when not in use, using body heat to prevent rust. The Type 14, with its enclosed design and tight tolerances, became hopelessly clogged with mud. Ammunition quality disparities became extreme by Okinawa. American .45 ACP ammunition maintained consistent performance throughout the campaign. Lot testing showed velocity variations of less than 30 feet per second and no misfires in 100,000 rounds tested. Japanese 8mm Nambu ammunition, produced in 1945 under bombing and material shortages, showed catastrophic quality control failures. Captured ammunition tested by American ordnance units revealed 30% misfires due to faulty primers, velocity variations exceeding 300 feet per second within single lots, case head separations from brittle brass, and squib loads that lodged bullets in barrels. The Japanese conducted their final organized resistance in the Kian Peninsula at Okinawa's southern tip in mid-June. Here, in the maze of coral caves and ridges, combat reached its most primitive level. American forces used flamethrowers, demolition charges, and small arms to systematically eliminate Japanese positions. The 96th Infantry Division reported expending 450,000 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition during June alone, more than many divisions used in entire European campaigns. Private First Class Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector medic who refused to carry weapons, provided unique testimony about pistol effectiveness. Serving with the 77th Infantry Division, Doss witnessed countless close combat engagements while treating wounded. In his post-war interviews, he stated, "The difference between our 45s and their pistols was like night and day. I saw Japanese officers empty their pistols into our boys who kept fighting. But when our boys hit a Japanese soldier with a 45, he went down and stayed down. That pistol saved many American lives." The battle's statistics tell the story of American material superiority. American forces suffered 12,520 killed and 36,631 wounded. Japanese losses included approximately 110,000 military deaths, plus 100,000 Okinawan civilians. The 10-to-1 kill ratio in America's favor reflected superior firepower at every level, from naval guns to individual pistols. In close combat, where individual weapons determined survival, the M1911A1's superiority multiplied American effectiveness. The final accounting of M1911A1 versus Type 14 production reveals more than numbers. It exposes the fatal delusion of Imperial Japan attempting to fight an industrial war with artisanal production methods. By war's end, American factories had produced 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols between 1941 and 1945. Japan managed approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over nearly 2 decades from 1926 to 1945. This 4.7-to-1 production ratio during just the war years understates the true disparity when considering quality, standardization, and ammunition supply. American production methodology revolutionized manufacturing. Remington Rand's Syracuse plant, converting from typewriter production, achieved remarkable efficiency through innovation. They introduced broach rifling, cutting perfect barrels in single passes rather than traditional cut rifling requiring multiple passes. Statistical process control, developed by Walter Schuhart and implemented by Western Electric engineers, maintained tolerances while increasing speed. By 1943, Remington Rand produced 1,000 pistols daily with fewer than 1% rejection rate. The learning curve demonstrated American industrial adaptability. Colt, with decades of experience, required 1.2 man-hours to produce one M1911A1 frame in 1942. Remington Rand, starting from zero firearms experience, achieved 0.8 man-hours per frame by 1943 through superior industrial engineering. Ithaca Gun Company introduced fixture designs that reduced machining setups by 60%, innovations later adopted across all manufacturers. Parts interchangeability was absolute. In November 1943, Army Ordnance conducted a demonstration at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Armourers disassembled 100 M1911A1 pistols from different manufacturers, mixed all parts randomly, and reassembled them blindfolded. All 100 pistols functioned perfectly. This interchangeability proved crucial when depot-level maintenance involved assembling functional weapons from damaged ones. Japanese Type 14 parts, even from the same manufacturer, often required hand-fitting. The economic efficiency was staggering. In 1942, the unit cost of an M1911A1 was $31.42. By 1945, improved production methods reduced this to $15, less than half despite wartime inflation. The Japanese Type 14, requiring extensive hand-fitting, cost 78 yen throughout the war, equivalent to $31.20 in 1941 dollars, but representing a far greater portion of Japanese industrial capacity. Ammunition production dwarfed weapon manufacturing. American factories produced approximately 3.5 billion rounds of .45 ACP during World War II. This equated to 1,862 rounds for every M1911A1 manufactured, sufficient for extensive training and combat consumption. Japanese 8mm Nambu production totaled approximately 100 million rounds from 1926 to 1945, or 250 rounds per pistol over 2 decades. By 1945, Japanese forces allocated 20 rounds per pistol for entire campaigns. Quality control revealed philosophical differences. Every American M1911A1 underwent proof testing with high-pressure cartridges generating 30% over standard pressure. Barrels were air-gauged to ensure dimensional consistency. Function testing required 100 rounds without malfunction. Random samples underwent 5,000-round endurance tests. Metallurgical analysis ensured proper heat treatment and material composition. Japanese quality control, minimal before the war, essentially disappeared by 1944. Late-war Type 14S show tool marks, dimensional variations, and soft metal that would have failed any inspection standard. The supply chain comparison was equally telling. American manufacturers received specialized steel alloys, SAE 4140 for barrels, 8620 for frames, produced to exacting specifications. Carbide cutting tools, themselves products of American industrial superiority, maintained precise dimensions through thousands of parts. Japanese manufacturers, by 1944, used whatever steel was available. Captured Type 14 shows frames made from recycled ship armor, barrels from artillery brass, and springs from salvaged automotive parts. Subcontractor networks multiplied American advantages. Grip manufacturers, Colt Plastics Company, Franzite Company, Keys Fiber Company, produced millions of synthetic grips impervious to tropical conditions. Spring manufacturers, Wolf Company, Associated Spring Corporation, provided consistent springs heat-treated for specific tension requirements. Magazine contractors, Scoville Manufacturing, Risdon Manufacturing, produced magazines to tolerances ensuring universal fit. Japanese production remained vertically integrated within arsenals, limiting production capacity and preventing specialization benefits. The training ammunition allocation demonstrated different priorities. American forces allocated 240 rounds per man for basic pistol qualification, 500 rounds for advanced training. Combat units received 100 rounds monthly for sustainment training. Total training expenditure exceeded 500 million rounds. Japanese officers, purchasing their own ammunition, typically fired fewer than 100 rounds annually. Many arrived in combat having fired their Type 14 fewer times than American Marines fired in single training sessions. Replacement rates revealed combat realities. American forces replaced approximately 15% of M1911A1 pistols annually due to combat loss, damage beyond repair, or excessive wear. The industrial base easily supported this attrition while increasing total inventory. Japanese forces couldn't replace losses. Units that lost pistols to combat damage simply went without. By Okinawa, many Japanese officers carried swords exclusively, their pistols long since failed. The Pacific War's final accounting revealed truths that transcended mere technical specifications or production statistics. In the crucible of history's largest naval war, fought across millions of square miles of ocean and thousands of islands, the superiority of the M1911A1 over the Type 14 Nambu represented American industrial democracy's triumph over Japanese military feudalism. The mathematics of terminal ballistics were inexorable. The 45 ACP's 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second delivered 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches diameter in ballistic gelatin. The 8mm Nambu's 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second generated 256 foot-pounds, creating wound channels barely larger than caliber. This 44% energy advantage translated directly to stopping power, the ability to immediately incapacitate an enemy before they could continue attacking. But energy alone didn't tell the complete story. The 45 ACP's heavy bullet retained velocity better, maintaining 89% of muzzle energy at 50 yards versus 76% for the 8mm Nambu. The larger frontal area, 0.451 inches versus 0.320 inches, created 98% greater tissue displacement. The subsonic velocity eliminated ballistic crack, reducing shooter disorientation in confined spaces. The straight-walled case extracted reliably from fouled chambers. Every technical parameter favoured the American cartridge. The weapons themselves reflected their cartridge's characteristics. The M1911A1's robust construction, weighing 39 ounces empty, absorbed recoil while providing steady shooting platform. The single-action trigger, breaking at 4 to 5 pounds, enabled precise shot placement under stress. The grip safety and manual safety prevented accidental discharge while allowing instant readiness. The 7-round magazine, while holding one less round than the Type 14, could be changed in seconds, and the pistol would still fire its chambered round without magazine present. The Type 14's attempted advantages proved illusory. Its lighter weight, 32 ounces, made recoil harder to control. The heavy, gritty trigger pull degraded accuracy. The safety location required two-handed operation. The magazine retention spring made reloading nearly impossible under stress. The magazine disconnect safety transformed magazine damage into complete weapon failure. Every supposed improvement degraded combat effectiveness. Combat validation was overwhelming. At Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Palayu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the M1911A1 proved itself in thousands of close-quarters engagements. Marines and soldiers trusted their lives to the pistol, knowing it would function despite mud, sand, water, or neglect. The psychological impact multiplied its effectiveness. Japanese soldiers learned to fear the distinctive boom of the .45, knowing it meant immediate death. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey included extensive interviews with surviving Japanese officers. Colonel Susumu Nishiura, staff officer with the 32nd Army on Okinawa, stated, "Your .45 caliber automatic pistol was greatly feared. It would knock a man down with hits to extremities. Our pistols required multiple center hits to stop an American soldier. This disparity in effectiveness was demoralizing to our forces." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, wrote in his final report before his death, "American material superiority is overwhelming. Their individual weapons, particularly their powerful pistols, give them great advantage in close combat where spiritual power cannot overcome mechanical superiority." This admission, from an officer who had spent years in America as a military attaché, revealed Japanese recognition of their material inadequacy. The industrial disparity was insurmountable. American factories produced more M1911A1 pistols in 1943 alone, over 600,000, than Japan manufactured Type 14s in 2 decades. American quality improved throughout production while Japanese quality collapsed. American ammunition supply was unlimited while Japanese forces hoarded every cartridge. American training was extensive while Japanese training was minimal. Every measurable parameter favored American forces by factors of 3-to-1 to 10-to-1. The human cost crystallized these advantages. Throughout the Pacific War, Marine and Army units armed with M1911A1 pistols consistently achieved kill ratios exceeding 10-to-1 in close combat. On Iwo Jima, 6,821 Americans died versus 21,000 Japanese, a 3-to-1 ratio despite attacking fortified positions. On Okinawa, 12,520 Americans died versus 110,000 Japanese, an 8.8-to-1 ratio. While many factors contributed to these disparities, the effectiveness of individual weapons in close combat played a crucial role. Veterans' testimonies provided the final verdict. Marine Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, before his death on Iwo Jima, wrote, "The .45 automatic is the finest military pistol ever made. It hits like a sledgehammer and never fails. One shot ends any argument." Technical Sergeant Charles Lindbergh of the 3rd Marine Division stated, "That pistol saved more Marine lives than any other weapon. When Japanese soldiers got inside our lines at night, the .45 was what stopped them." Japanese veterans who survived American .45 ACP hits bore distinctive scars. Dr. Teruo Ueno, treating veterans at Tokyo Veterans Hospital post-war, noted, "Wounds from the American .45 caliber pistol were immediately recognizable decades later." The massive tissue damage created distinctive scarring patterns. Veterans shot with this weapon considered themselves fortunate to have survived. The M1911. A1's legacy extended far beyond World War II. Special Operations Forces carried it through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 21st century. The Type 14 vanished immediately after Japanese surrender, replaced by American weapons. Modern Japanese self-defense forces have never attempted to design indigenous pistols, recognizing the futility of competing with Western small arms development. The broader implications transcended weapons. The M1911A1 represented American industrial democracy, standardized, mass-produced, effective, and available to every soldier regardless of rank or wealth. The Type 14 represented Japanese military feudalism, handcrafted, inconsistent, inadequate, and restricted to officers who could afford purchase. These weapons embodied their society's approaches to warfare. In the final analysis, the Pacific War validated the Thompson-Lagarde test's conclusion from 1904, "In close combat, stopping power determines survival." The M1911A1 delivered that stopping power reliably, consistently, in any condition, millions of times. The Type 14 Nambu failed to deliver adequate performance even under ideal conditions. This disparity, multiplied across millions of individual combats, contributed significantly to American victory. The mathematics of death in the Pacific War were precise and unforgiving. When Staff Sergeant William Bourdillon charged Japanese pillboxes on Tarawa, when Sergeant John Basilone held Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, when thousands of unnamed Marines and soldiers fought in nameless caves on forgotten islands, they carried a weapon that would not fail them: the M1911. A1 automatic pistol firing the 45A CP cartridge. Every trigger pull launched a 230-grain projectile at 830 feet per second, delivering 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating wound channels that immediately incapacitated enemy combatants. This simple equation, mass times velocity squared divided by 450,240, determined survival in countless close-quarters engagements. The Japanese Type 14. Nambu, firing its 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second for 256 foot-pounds of energy, consistently failed this mathematical test of combat effectiveness. The production statistics told an equally decisive story. American factories manufactured 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols during World War II, supported by 3.5 billion rounds of ammunition. Japan produced approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over 2 decades, with perhaps 100 million rounds total. This 4.7 to 1 production advantage in pistols and 35 to 1 advantage in ammunition during just the war years represented industrial supremacy that no amount of spiritual power could overcome. But beyond numbers lay a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Victory belongs to nations that combine industrial capacity with engineering excellence, that value individual soldiers' lives enough to equip them with the best possible weapons, that learn from combat experience and systematically improve their tools of war. The M1911. A1 embodied these principles. The Type 14 Nambu represented their antithesis. In the end, the Pacific War's outcome was determined by many factors: strategy, logistics, code-breaking, naval power, and atomic weapons. But in those desperate moments when combat reduced to its most primitive form, one man facing another at arm's length with death seconds away, the American Marine or soldier with an M1911A1 held overwhelming advantage over his Japanese opponent with a Type 14 Nambu. The thunder of the 45 ACP echoed from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay, each shot a small but decisive contribution to victory. The M1911A1 didn't win the Pacific War alone, but in the brutal arithmetic of close combat, it ensured that American forces held a crushing advantage that multiplied across thousands of engagements to help determine the war's outcome. In this mathematics of survival, where stopping power equaled victory and mechanical failure meant death, America's M1911, a 1.45 caliber pistol, stood supreme, and Japan's Type 14 Nambu was utterly, catastrophically, and fatally outgunned. The last word belongs to Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, who understood the importance of individual weapons in determining victory. Our technology, including the superiority of individual weapons like the M1911 automatic pistol, gave our Marines and soldiers decisive advantages in close combat. When battles came down to individual fights at close quarters, American forces prevailed because they carried superior weapons that functioned reliably under the worst conditions imaginable. This technical superiority, multiplied millions of times across the Pacific, helped secure our victory.
June 19, 1944. Task Force 58, Philippine Sea. The Fighter Direction Center. Radar operators tracked blips across phosphorescent screens as Japanese attack formations transformed into intercept vectors. Message from submarine USS Albacore. Enemy carrier force detected. Multiple air groups launching. Attack imminent. Lieutenant Charles Sims adjusted his headphones and reached for the radio transmitter. 15 aircraft carriers would scramble their fighters. The USS Lexington, the USS Enterprise, and the USS Yorktown. What none of them knew was that this single day would witness the most lopsided aerial massacre in naval history. The Pacific War had taught American aviators that Japanese carrier pilots were not just skilled adversaries. They were the samurai of the skies. Destroy those pilots, and entire carrier groups would become floating targets. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet had assembled the largest carrier striking force Japan could muster. 9 aircraft carriers: Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hiyo, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. 430 aircraft positioned to deliver a knockout blow against the American invasion of Saipan. The Imperial Japanese Navy's strategy assumed that land-based aircraft from Guam, Rota, and Tinian would supplement the carrier strikes. Combined with the mobile fleet's aircraft, over 500 planes would overwhelm American defenses. Admiral Soemu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet, had declared, "The fate of the Empire rests on this one battle." The Grumman F-6F Hellcat sliced through Pacific thermals at 380 miles per hour. Her Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine generated 2,000 horsepower, propelling 12,598 pounds of armor and firepower through contested airspace. Commander David McCampbell stood in the ready room aboard USS Essex studying the tactical situation. His air group carried 104 pilots trained specifically to kill Japanese aircraft. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns per fighter, 400 rounds per gun, and mounted throughout the fuselage 212 pounds of cockpit armor that would prove decisive in the coming battle. The Hellcat represented American industrial engineering at its peak. Unlike the fragile Zero that sacrificed everything for maneuverability, the F-6F prioritized survivability and firepower. Each of the 6 machine guns fired armor-piercing incendiary rounds at 850 rounds per minute. The ballistics were unforgiving. The Zero could outmaneuver the Hellcat in a turning fight. The Hellcat needed only 2 seconds of accurate fire to destroy any Japanese aircraft. Lieutenant Alexander Vraciu had studied those statistics during 8 months of combat. DePaul University graduate with a mind for deflection shooting and energy management, Vraciu understood that aerial combat was ultimately about altitude and speed. Kinetic energy determined survival. Target acquisition, deflection angles. The difference between victory and death often came down to split-second positioning and superior firepower. The American force assembled for this battle was staggering. 15 fleet carriers, 956 aircraft, including 475 Hellcat fighters. Task Force 58, under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, had become the most powerful naval striking force ever assembled. Against this armada, Ozawa could muster 430 carrier aircraft plus approximately 100 land-based planes, already outnumbered nearly 2-to-1 before the first shot was fired. Aboard the Japanese carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Ozawa reviewed his battle plan. 430 aircraft organized into sequential attack waves. The first mobile fleet displaced 65,000 tons of carrier steel, powered by the finest engines Japanese shipyards could produce. Her air groups contained pilots who had trained for months in preparation for this decisive engagement. But the Japanese Navy's greatest weakness remained the same vulnerability that had plagued it since Midway: the inexperience of replacement pilots. Veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean raids, and the early carrier battles had been steadily attritioned. Their replacements averaged fewer than 200 flying hours compared to American pilots with over 500 hours of intensive training. The disparity went deeper than flight hours. American pilots received extensive gunnery training, carrier landing practice, and instrument flying instruction. Japanese replacement pilots often had never fired their guns before entering combat. Many had performed fewer than 10 carrier landings. Navigation training was minimal, relying on flight leaders to guide formations to targets. The American ships formed a defensive ring, a layered defense with destroyers on the perimeter, battleships in the middle ring, and carriers at the center. Each ship swept the sky with SK and SC radar systems. Fighter direction officers worked in air-conditioned compartments, their plotting boards tracking every contact within 150 miles. Radar operator First Class James Peterson had been tracking contacts for 14 months across the Pacific. His hands moved automatically across the radar controls as he adjusted the gain and sweep rate. The screen showed clear returns against minimal sea clutter. Weather conditions were ideal for radar detection. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, with no precipitation to create false returns. At 10 o'clock on June 19th, Peterson's scope erupted with contacts. Range 150 miles, bearing 260 degrees, altitude approximately 20,000 feet. He pressed the general quarters alarm and reached for the intercom. Bridge, radar, large raid bearing 260, range 150 miles, Angels 20. On Ozawa's flagship, the attack coordinator had launched the first wave at 0830. 69 aircraft, 16 Zero fighters, 45 dive bombers, and 8 torpedo bombers. Launch time from deck to formation was 23 minutes. Time to target was estimated at 90 minutes, cruising at 180 knots to conserve fuel for the return flight. Fighter Director Lieutenant Joseph Eggert plotted the intercept geometry on his status board. Enemy speed estimated at 180 knots, course roughly 080 toward Task Force 58. Time to intercept approximately 35 minutes if Hellcats launched immediately. The precision of aerial interception depended on accurate vector calculations and fuel management. Admiral Mark Mitcher's response was immediate. Launch all fighters. Vector 260, climb to Angels 25 inches. The first Hellcat launched at 10:23. Within 12 minutes, 140 F-6F fighters were airborne and climbing toward the incoming raid. Each pilot had been briefed on Japanese tactics, aircraft recognition, and the critical importance of maintaining altitude advantage. The Hellcats climbed at 3,000 feet per minute, their powerful engines giving them a crucial edge in the race for altitude. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer led the 1st Division of Hellcats from USS Essex, 16 fighters in 4 plane divisions, climbing through 20,000 feet when radar operators called the bogies at 24,000 feet, 30 miles out and closing. Tally-ho! Bandits! 2 o'clock high! The sky erupted with twisting contrails as Hellcats dove on the Japanese formation. Brewer's first burst sent a Zero spiraling down in flames. His wingman destroyed a dive bomber with a deflection shot that removed its right wing. Within 90 seconds, 8 Japanese aircraft were falling toward the ocean. The Hellcats' 6.50 caliber guns created a lethal convergence at 300 yards where all 6 streams of bullets intersected. At that range, a 2-second burst delivered 170 rounds into a target area roughly 6 feet in diameter. Japanese aircraft, designed without self-sealing fuel tanks or armor protection, literally disintegrated under such concentrated firepower. Lieutenant Stanley Swede Veitasa from USS Yorktown described the engagement. They came in perfect formation, like they were on parade. We hit them from above and behind. It was like shooting clay pigeons. They didn't even try to evade. By 11 o'clock, the first wave had been annihilated. 42 aircraft destroyed, 27 damaged and forced to return. Only 12 Japanese aircraft penetrated to attack positions, and of those, 7 were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire from the battleship screen. The new proximity-fused shells, a closely guarded secret, detonated near aircraft without requiring direct hits, creating lethal clouds of shrapnel. At 11:07, radar detected the second wave. 128 aircraft launched from Junyo, Hyo, and Ryuho at 900 hours. This formation included 53 Judy dive bombers, 27 Zero fighters, and 48 torpedo bombers. Lieutenant Commander Kazuo Takahashi, leading the strike, had survived 18 combat missions, including attacks at Coral Sea and Eastern Solomons. Fighter direction vectored fresh cap fighters to intercept 60 miles from the task force. The Hellcats had altitude advantage, 28,000 feet versus the Japanese at 19,000 feet. Energy advantage in aerial combat translated directly to tactical superiority. Lieutenant Alexander Vrachiu's division was among those scrambled to meet the second wave. But his Hellcat suffered mechanical failure on launch. The supercharger stuck in low blower, limiting his speed to 300 miles per hour and climb rate to half normal. By the time he reached altitude, his squadron mates had pulled ahead to engage the enemy. Vrachiu spotted the Japanese formation below him. There were at least 50 of them, Judy dive bombers in perfect formation. They looked like sitting ducks. Despite his mechanical disadvantage, Vrachiu executed a diving attack from directly above the Japanese formation. His first target exploded immediately, the Judy's bomb load detonating in a massive fireball. He pulled up, rolled inverted, and dove again. The second bomber's tail separated from the fuselage as 50 caliber rounds sawed through the aluminum structure. The third kill came as Vrachiu pulled out of his dive and climbed back for altitude. A Judy crossed in front of him, and he fired a short burst that set the bomber's fuel tanks ablaze. The fourth victim never saw him coming. Vrachiu attacked from the bomber's blind spot below and behind, his tracers walking up the fuselage until the aircraft exploded. For his fifth kill, Vrachiu chased a Judy attempting to escape at low altitude. Despite his reduced speed, he closed to point-blank range and fired. The bomber cartwheeled into the ocean. The sixth and final kill proved the most spectacular. As Vrachiu lined up his shot, the Judy's bomb load detonated from the heat of burning fuel, creating a fireball that Vrachiu flew through. In 8 minutes, Vrachiu destroyed 6 dive bombers using only 360 rounds of ammunition. His ordnance crew later calculated he had fired less than 5 seconds total to achieve 6 kills. When he landed aboard Lexington, he held up 6 fingers to the bridge where Admiral Mitcher watched. The photograph became one of the war's iconic images. The second wave lost 97 aircraft. Hellcat pilots claimed 70 kills. Ships' anti-aircraft guns destroyed another 20. Only 31 Japanese aircraft survived to return to their carriers, most heavily damaged. The technological gap between American and Japanese aviation had become insurmountable by June 1944. The F-6F Hellcat's development represented 3 years of combat experience distilled into mechanical superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R 2800 double wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower in standard configuration, 2,200 with water injection. This power drove a three-bladed Hamilton standard propeller with constant speed control, allowing optimal performance at any altitude. Maximum speed at 23,000 feet was 380 miles per hour. Rate of climb exceeded 3,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling reached 37,300 feet. Defensive systems included 212 pounds of armor plating protecting the pilot, oil cooler, and oil tank. The windscreen consisted of 1.5-inch bulletproof glass capable of stopping 20mm cannon rounds. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented the catastrophic fires that plagued Japanese aircraft. Total fuel capacity was 250 gallons internal, with provision for a 150-gallon drop tank extending range to 1,530 miles. The fire control system represented American mass production at its finest. 6 Browning M 2.50 caliber machine guns, each firing at 850 rounds per minute with 400 rounds per gun. Total ammunition load was 2,400 rounds. The guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentrated impact zone where a brief burst could destroy any aircraft. Comparative analysis revealed the stark disparity. The Mitsubishi A6M50 weighed 6,025 pounds loaded, half the Hellcat's weight. Maximum speed was 351 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour slower than the F6F. Most critically, the Zero carried no armor protection and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Its two 20mm cannon carried only 60 rounds each, and the two 7.7mm machine guns were ineffective against American armor. The Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, one of Japan's newest aircraft, could reach 339 miles per hour but remained vulnerable to any hit. Without armor or self-sealing tanks, a single incendiary bullet could ignite its fuel. The Nakajima B-6N Jill torpedo bomber suffered similar vulnerabilities while being slower and less maneuverable. Japanese pilot training had collapsed under the weight of attrition. Pre-war pilots received 700 hours of flight training before joining operational units. By 1944, replacement pilots averaged 200 hours, with some receiving as few as 100 hours before combat deployment. Navigation training was minimal. Instrument flying almost non-existent. Formation flying rudimentary. American pilot training had become an industrial process. Naval aviators received 600 hours minimum before carrier qualification. Instrument flying, navigation, gunnery, carrier operations, formation tactics, every aspect refined through systematic instruction. Training bases in Florida, Texas, and California produced 10,000 naval aviators annually by 1944. Ozawa launched his third strike at 10 o'clock. 47 aircraft from Zuikaku, Chiyoda, and Chitos. By now, Japanese flight leaders knew the previous waves had encountered fierce opposition, but orders were orders. Lieutenant Yoshio Fukumura, leading 15 Zero fighters, had watched the survivors of earlier strikes return with tales of swarming Hellcats and walls of anti-aircraft fire. Radar detected the third wave at 1,300 hours, range 120 miles. Fighter direction had refined their interception tactics based on the morning's engagements. Instead of meeting the raid head-on, CAP fighters would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing mutual support among Japanese formations. Commander William Dean from USS Hornet led 20 Hellcats in a high-side attack from the sun. The Japanese fighters, flying protective weave above their bombers, never saw the Americans until tracers started connecting. Dean's first pass destroyed 3 Zeros in 15 seconds. His wingman killed 2 more in the same diving attack. The escort fighters eliminated, Hellcats fell on the bombers with ruthless efficiency. Lieutenant James Shirley from USS Bunker Hill described it. They just sat there in formation while we shot them to pieces. No evasive action, no defensive tactics. They flew straight and level while we made pass after pass. Ensign Wilbur Spider Webb, flying his first combat mission from USS Hornet, encountered the scattered remnants of the third wave. In his after-action report, he wrote, "I couldn't believe they just flew straight and level while I shot them down. After the third one exploded, I started feeling sorry for them. Then I remembered Pearl Harbor and kept shooting." Webb destroyed 6 aircraft in this single engagement, becoming an ace in a day on his first combat mission. 40 aircraft in the third wave. 7 survived to return to their carriers. Not a single Japanese aircraft reached attack position against American ships. The fourth and final wave launched at 11:30. 82 aircraft from the Japanese carrier division, including 30 Zero fighters, 36 dive bombers, and 16 torpedo bombers. This strike included many of the remaining experienced pilots, held in reserve for the decisive blow. But the strike became disorganized almost immediately. Navigation errors sent half the formation toward Guam instead of Task Force 58. Those that found the American fleet encountered a wall of fighters stacked from 10,000 to 30,000 feet. The Americans had perfected their defense, with fresh fighters constantly rotating through the combat zone. Lieutenant Commander Roger Mealy from Fighting Squadron 2 intercepted the fourth wave 40 miles from the carriers. His division of 4 Hellcats attacked 30 Japanese aircraft. In 12 minutes of combat, they destroyed 17 enemy planes without loss. Mela personally accounted for 5, methodically picking off aircraft from the rear of the formation forward. The slaughter continued as successive waves of Hellcats rotated through the battle area. Fresh fighters with full ammunition replaced those running low. Damaged Hellcats returned to their carriers while mechanics and ordnance crews prepared aircraft for immediate turnaround. The American carriers had become a continuous conveyor belt of destruction, launching fighters, recovering them, rearming, refueling, and launching again. Commander David McCampbell, leading Essex's fighters, demonstrated tactical brilliance throughout the engagement. During the morning battles, he shot down 5 Judy dive bombers in his first sortie. After refueling and rearming, he launched again in the afternoon and destroyed 2 more Zeros over Guam, bringing his day's total to 7 victories. His leadership in positioning squadrons for maximum efficiency while managing fuel and ammunition reserves proved crucial to the defense's success. By 1430, the fourth wave had ceased to exist as a cohesive force. Scattered survivors fled individually toward their carriers or diverted to Guam. American Combat Air Patrol followed them, destroying stragglers across a 100-mile swath of ocean. While Hellcats dominated the air battle, American submarines delivered crushing underwater attacks against Ozawa's carriers. USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, had been trailing the Japanese fleet since dawn. At 9:05, Blanchard fired 6 torpedoes at the carrier Taiho, Ozawa's flagship. 1 torpedo struck the carrier's aviation fuel tanks. The damage seemed manageable initially, but volatile fuel vapors spread throughout the ship. At 14:32, a massive explosion tore Taiho apart. The newest and largest carrier in the Japanese fleet commissioned just 3 months earlier, sank with 1,650 crew members. USS Kavala, on her maiden war patrol under Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, detected carrier Shokaku at 1100 hours. Kostler fired 6 torpedoes, scoring 3 hits. Aviation fuel erupted through the hangar deck. Bomb magazines detonated in sympathetic explosions. Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz, sank at 1400 hours with 1,272 men. In 4 hours, submarines had eliminated 2 fleet carriers totaling 60,000 tons. Combined with the aerial massacre, the Japanese Navy had suffered catastrophic and irreversible losses. By sunset on June 19th, the arithmetic of destruction was staggering. Japanese losses: 346 carrier aircraft destroyed, approximately 50 land-based aircraft from Guam and Rota eliminated. 2 fleet carriers sunk. More critically, over 400 pilots and aircrew killed, including most of the remaining experienced aviators. American losses: 29 aircraft in aerial combat and operational accidents. Most pilots were recovered. Total American casualties: 109 dead from all causes, including anti-aircraft accidents and operational losses. The kill ratio exceeded 15-1 in favor of American fighters. Individual pilots achieved remarkable scores. Lieutenant Alex Vratsiu, 6 kills. Commander David McCampbell, 7 kills. Lieutenant William Dean, 5 kills. Ensign Wilbur Webb, 6 kills in his first combat mission. The human dimension behind these statistics was profound. Young American pilots, many in their early 20s, had systematically destroyed an entire generation of Japanese naval aviators. Lieutenant Junior Grade Charles Stimson from USS Cabot later reflected, "It wasn't really combat. It was execution. They came at us in waves, and we shot them down in waves. I felt like I was at a target range." Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, observing from Iwo Jima, later wrote, "June 19th, 1944, was the death of Japanese naval aviation. Our carefully rebuilt air groups, 2 years in training, were destroyed in a single day." The Americans had turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. Those who survived spoke of hellcats everywhere, above, below, behind. There was no escape. June 20th brought the final act. American search planes located Ozawa's retreating fleet 275 miles west of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitcher faced a critical decision: launch a strike at extreme range, knowing his pilots would return after dark, or let the Japanese escape. At 16:30, Mitcher gave the order: launch everything. 216 American aircraft launched in the fading light, 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, and 54 torpedo bombers. They found the Japanese fleet at sunset, attacking through desperate anti-aircraft fire. The strike sank carrier Hio and 2 fleet oilers, while damaging carriers Zuikaku and Chiyoda, battleship Haruna, and cruiser Maya. Japanese combat air patrol, reduced to fewer than 35 operational fighters, could offer minimal resistance. Another 65 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in this twilight battle. The return flight became an epic of navigation and survival. Pilots flew through darkness with fuel gauges touching empty. Many had never attempted night carrier landings. Radio discipline broke down as desperate pilots called for bearings to any American ship. Admiral Mitcher made perhaps his most famous decision: turn on the lights. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated, searchlights pointed vertically, running lights blazing, flight decks outlined in lights. The risk of submarine attack was accepted to save American aircrews. Destroyers fired star shells to mark the fleet's position. Cruisers turned on searchlights as beacons. The ocean lit up like a city, guiding exhausted pilots home. Aircraft landed on any available deck. Fuel-starved planes ditched alongside destroyers. Damaged aircraft crash-landed on carriers, their crews pushing them overboard to clear decks for others still airborne. 80 aircraft were lost to fuel exhaustion or deck crashes, but aggressive rescue operations saved most crews. Destroyers assigned as plane guards recovered pilots sometimes within minutes of ditching. Only 49 airmen from the returning strike force were lost, a remarkable achievement given the circumstances. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, christened the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by victorious American pilots, marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation as an effective force. In 2 days, Japan lost approximately 480 carrier and land-based aircraft, 3 fleet carriers, and 2 oilers. The pilot losses were catastrophic. Over 445 aircrew killed, including most remaining veterans. Admiral Ozawa's Operation Eigo had assumed rough parity in pilot skill and aircraft performance. Instead, Japanese pilots encountered American aviators with superior training flying superior aircraft supported by superior radar and fighter direction. The technological and training gap had become unbridgeable. The Marianas fell to American forces within weeks. B-29 superfortresses based on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would soon bring the Japanese homeland under sustained strategic bombardment. The November 1944 raids from these bases marked the beginning of the systematic destruction of Japanese cities and industry. Japanese naval aviation attempted one final operation at Leyte Gulf 4 months later, but could muster only 108 aircraft from 6 carriers. Most were shot down without achieving significant results. The carriers themselves were sacrificed as decoys, empty shells of their former power. After Leyte Gulf, Japanese carriers never again launched offensive operations. The Hellcat's dominance reflected American industrial capability and design philosophy. Grumman produced 12,275 F-6F Hellcats in just over 2 years, with peak production reaching 600 aircraft per month. Each aircraft required 20,000 man-hours to construct, yet assembly lines achieved remarkable efficiency through standardization and minimal design changes. The basic F-6F design remained essentially unchanged from 1943 to 1945, while Germany and Japan continuously modified their fighters seeking marginal performance improvements. America focused on mass production of a proven design. This philosophy extended throughout American aircraft production. Quantity with adequate quality defeated quality without quantity. Radar technology provided the decisive edge in fighter direction. The SK air search radar could detect aircraft at 100 miles, allowing 40 minutes warning of incoming raids. The SM fighter direction radar provided precise bearing and altitude data for vectoring interceptors. Combat Information Centers integrated radar data with radio communications, creating a real-time battle management system decades ahead of its time. The proximity fuse, one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, revolutionized anti-aircraft defense. These shells detonated automatically when passing near aircraft, eliminating the need for precise altitude settings. The resulting lethality forced Japanese aircraft to attack from higher altitudes, reducing their accuracy. American logistics sustained continuous operations at unprecedented tempo. Task Force 58's Service Squadron delivered 270,000 gallons of aviation fuel, 7,000 gallons of lubricating oil, and 45 tons of ammunition daily during the battle. Replacement aircraft were catapulted from escort carriers directly to fleet carriers during operations. Damaged aircraft were repaired overnight by maintenance crews working around the clock. While technology and training created the conditions for victory, individual pilots executed the destruction. Their stories reveal the human dimension behind the statistics. Lieutenant Junior Grade Milton Carruthers from USS Bunker Hill achieved 5 kills despite having his hydraulic system shot out by a Japanese rear gunner. Unable to lower his landing gear normally, he cranked them down manually while flying with his knees, then landed successfully on the carrier. His plane captain counted 47 holes in the Hellcat's fuselage and wings. Ensign Robert Duncan from USS Princeton was separated from his division during the second wave interception. Flying alone, he encountered 12 Japanese bombers without escort. In a running battle lasting 15 minutes, Duncan destroyed 4 bombers before running out of ammunition. He then used his aircraft to force another bomber to crash into the ocean, achieving 5 kills without firing his last shots. Lieutenant Commander George Duncan, no relation to Robert, from USS Monterey, led a division that intercepted 40 Japanese aircraft. Outnumbered 10-1, Duncan's 4 Hellcats destroyed 19 enemy planes in 8 minutes. Duncan personally accounted for 6, using disciplined fire control to maximize his ammunition. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade John Strain, destroyed 5 more. The coordination between pilots demonstrated American tactical superiority. Divisions maintained mutual support while engaging multiple targets. Wingmen protected leaders during attacks. Damaged aircraft were escorted home by teammates. This disciplined teamwork contrasted sharply with the increasingly desperate individual efforts of Japanese pilots. For Japanese aviators, June 19th was apocalyptic. Pilot officer Yoshijiro Shirahama, one of 15 survivors from carrier Zuikaku's air group, later testified, "We knew we were flying to our deaths when we saw the wall of Hellcats waiting for us. The sky was filled with tracers. Planes exploded everywhere. I saw at least 20 of our aircraft destroyed in less than a minute." Lieutenant Commander Akira Tarui, leading torpedo bombers from Chiyoda, watched his entire squadron annihilated. The Americans attacked from above, below, and both sides simultaneously. We had no chance to maneuver or counterattack. My gunner was killed in the first pass. My controls were shot away in the second. I crashed into the sea and spent 6 hours in the water before a destroyer found me. The few experienced pilots understood their situation was hopeless. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi, an ace with 12 victories, survived by immediately jettisoning his bombs and fleeing at wave-top height. He later wrote, "The young pilots followed their training and maintained formation while being slaughtered. Those of us who survived did so by abandoning all tactical doctrine and running for our lives." The psychological impact was devastating. Ensign Takeo Miyazawa, who returned to Carrier Junyo with his aircraft riddled with bullets, reported, "The Americans were everywhere. As soon as we engaged one group of Hellcats, another group attacked from a different direction. Our formations dissolved into chaos. Pilots were screaming on the radio. I saw at least 30 of our planes going down in flames simultaneously." Admiral Mark Mitcher's leadership proved decisive throughout the battle. His decision to launch everything available against the incoming raids rather than maintaining reserves maximized defensive firepower when it mattered most. His controversial choice to illuminate the fleet for returning pilots demonstrated moral courage, risking submarine attack to save his air crews. Mitcher's fighter direction officers coordinated the most complex aerial defense in naval history. Managing over 450 fighters simultaneously required precise coordination between radar operators, fighter directors, and squadron commanders. The system worked flawlessly, vectoring fighters to optimal intercept positions while managing fuel states and ammunition loads. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Fifth Fleet, faced criticism for not pursuing Ozawa's fleet more aggressively. However, his primary mission was protecting the Saipan invasion force. His cautious approach prevented any possibility of a Japanese end run against the vulnerable transports and supply ships. The 50,000 troops ashore on Saipan depended on continuous supply from the invasion fleet. Admiral Ozawa, despite the catastrophic losses, conducted a skilled withdrawal under terrible conditions. His decision to transfer his flag from the sinking Taiho to cruiser Haguro, then to carrier Zuikaku, maintained command continuity. His after-action report honestly assessed the disaster. The enemy's fighter direction and pilot quality exceeded all estimates. Our aircrew training was inadequate for this level of combat. Behind the fighter pilots, thousands of sailors sustained the aerial defense. Plane handlers moved aircraft on crowded flight decks with choreographed precision. Ordnance men loaded millions of rounds of ammunition. Mechanics repaired battle damage between sorties. Landing signal officers guided damaged aircraft aboard despite hydraulic failures, wounded pilots, and fuel exhaustion. Aviation machinist mate first class Roberto Martinez from USS Lexington recalled, "We turned around aircraft in 12 minutes. Refuel, rearm, check the engine, patch bullet holes with fabric and dope, and launch again." We worked 20 hours straight during the battle. Nobody complained. We knew our pilots were counting on us. The ammunition expenditure was staggering. Task Force 58 fired over 2.4 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition on June 19th alone. Ordnance crews loaded 15,000 rounds per hour at peak tempo. Belt after belt of ammunition moved from magazines to aircraft, a continuous flow that never stopped during daylight hours. The medical response saved numerous lives. Flight surgeons treated wounded pilots between missions, allowing many to return to combat. Pharmacist mate second class James Thompson from USS Enterprise performed emergency surgery on a pilot whose foot was nearly severed by cannon fire. The pilot flew again 3 weeks later with a prosthetic attachment on his rudder pedal. Rescue operations achieved remarkable success. Destroyers assigned as plane guards recovered pilots sometimes within minutes of ditching. Submarines on lifeguard stations saved aviators hundreds of miles from the task force. OS-2. U-Kingfisher floatplanes launched from battleships and cruisers rescued pilots from inside Japanese-controlled waters. American codebreakers had provided strategic warning of Japanese intentions weeks before the battle. The decoded Japanese naval messages revealed Ozawa's basic plan, order of battle, and approximate timing. This intelligence allowed Spruance to position his forces optimally and prepare for the expected attack patterns. The capture of the Z-plan documents from Admiral Koga's crashed aircraft in March 1944 had given American planners detailed insight into Japanese strategic thinking. Every aspect of Operation Eigo was anticipated and countered before the first aircraft launched. Radio intelligence units aboard carriers intercepted and translated Japanese tactical communications in real time. Lieutenant Charles Sims, a Japanese language specialist aboard USS Lexington, monitored enemy pilot conversations throughout the battle. His translations provided immediate tactical intelligence on Japanese formations, targets, and damage assessments. One intercepted transmission revealed the depth of Japanese despair. A squadron leader called out, "This is impossible! They know where we are before we see them. It's not fighting, it's murder." Sims translated this in real time, boosting American morale while confirming the effectiveness of fighter direction. The intelligence advantage extended to technical knowledge. Captured Zero fighters had been thoroughly analyzed, revealing every strength and weakness. American pilots knew exact turning radii, climb rates, and vulnerable points. Training programs incorporated this knowledge, teaching pilots precisely how to fight Japanese aircraft. The Marianas Turkey Shoot fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. Japanese carriers would never again launch significant offensive operations. The Imperial Navy's carefully rebuilt air groups, 2 years in training, had been eliminated in 8 hours of combat. Production statistics illustrated Japan's impossible position. American factories produced 36,000 combat aircraft in 1944. Japan manufactured 13,000, most of inferior quality using substitute materials due to resource shortages. American pilot training programs graduated 65,000 aviators in 1944. Japan trained fewer than 5,000, most with minimal flight hours. The technological gap continued widening. America introduced improved fighters like the F-4U-4 Corsair and F-8F Bearcat. Radar systems improved monthly. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells made attacking American ships virtually suicidal. Japan had no response except the desperate kamikaze tactics adopted 3 months later at Leyte Gulf. Strategic bombing from the captured Marianas began in November 1944. B-29s flying from Saipan and Tinian systematically destroyed Japanese cities and industry. The March 1945 firebombing of Tokyo killed more people than either atomic bomb. The atomic bombs that ended the war flew from Tinian's North Field, built on an island captured because Japanese naval aviation could not stop the American invasion. The institutional knowledge lost with Japan's veteran pilots could never be replaced. Flight instructors were pulled from training units to fill combat squadrons, further degrading training quality. By war's end, Japanese pilots averaged less than 40 hours flight time before entering combat. Many never successfully landed on a carrier. The battle validated American training doctrine emphasizing deflection shooting, energy management, and mutual support. The thatch weave and similar tactical innovations proved superior to Japanese emphasis on individual combat and aerobatic skill. Team tactics defeated individual prowess consistently. Aircraft design philosophy was vindicated completely. The Hellcat's emphasis on pilot protection, firepower, and structural strength proved correct. The Zero's design philosophy, sacrificing everything for maneuverability, had become obsolete. Modern air combat rewarded survivability and firepower over agility. Fighter direction emerged as the crucial multiplier. Centralized control maximized defensive efficiency while minimizing losses. Radar-guided interception allowed defenders to always achieve favorable positioning. The Japanese, lacking comparable systems, flew blind into prepared killing zones. Logistics determined sustainability. American ability to maintain continuous operations, rapidly repair damage, and replace losses created cumulative advantages. Japanese inability to replace losses meant each battle further degraded their capabilities. Attrition warfare favored the side with superior industrial capacity. Training quality proved more important than individual courage. American pilots with 600 hours of training consistently defeated Japanese pilots with 200 hours, regardless of determination or fighting spirit. Systematic instruction in gunnery, tactics, and instrument flying created competence that enthusiasm could not match. Veterans of the turkey shoot carried their experiences throughout their lives. Alex Vraciu became a test pilot, evaluating jets that would define the next generation of naval aviation. He flew the Grumman F-8F Bearcat, the Hellcat's successor, and later tested early jet fighters. Vraciu retired as a commander in 1963, having survived being shot down over the Philippines and spending 6 weeks with Filipino guerrillas. David McCampbell continued his career, eventually commanding carrier air groups and serving as captain of carriers USS Bonhomme Richard and USS Severn. He retired as a captain in 1964, the Navy's all-time leading ace with 34 victories. McCampbell received the Medal of Honor for his actions on June 19 and October 24, 1944. Many pilots became airline captains, flying the same Pacific routes they had fought to secure. The transition from military to civilian aviation was natural for men trained to fly long distances over water. Their combat experience made them exceptionally capable pilots who could handle any emergency. Japanese survivors faced different futures. Some became Buddhist monks, seeking spiritual reconciliation with their wartime experiences. Others worked in Japan's post-war aviation industry, applying hard-learned lessons to civilian aircraft design. A few wrote memoirs, preserving the perspective of the defeated. The psychological impact lasted decades. American pilots spoke of recurring dreams where Japanese aircraft kept coming in endless waves. Japanese survivors described nightmares of Hellcats attacking from every direction. Both sides carried invisible wounds that time never fully healed. Reunions brought former enemies together in later years. At a 1984 gathering, Alex Vraciu met Sadamu Komachi, one of the few Japanese survivors from June 19th. Komachi told Vraciu, "You were doing your duty, as was I. I'm glad we both survived to become friends." They corresponded until Komachi's death in 2001. The battle's legacy endures in multiple forms. Aircraft museums display restored Hellcats and Zeros, allowing visitors to appreciate the physical reality behind the statistics. The National Museum of Naval Aviation's F-6F3 bears the markings of Alex Vraciu's aircraft, complete with 19 victory flags representing his total score. The USS Yorktown, now a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina, includes exhibits on the turkey shoot. Visitors can stand in the Combat Information Center, where fighter directors vectored Hellcats to their intercepts. The radar scopes, plotting boards, and communication equipment remain as they were in 1944. Maritime archaeologists have located several ships sunk during the battle. Shokaku rests at 12,000 feet, her flight deck still bearing aircraft ready for launch that never occurred. Taiho lies even deeper, her massive hull broken by the explosion that sent her down. These war graves are protected sites, memorializing the thousands who died in the Philippine Sea. Historical analysis continues evolving. Newly discovered Japanese documents reveal previously unknown details about pilot training, aircraft production, and command decisions. American records, gradually declassified, show the full extent of intelligence advantages and technological superiority. Veterans' oral histories provide irreplaceable perspectives. The Veterans History Project has recorded hundreds of interviews with turkey shoot participants. These first-hand accounts preserve details that official records miss: the smell of aviation fuel, the sound of Hellcat engines, the sight of burning aircraft falling like meteors. Educational programs ensure the battle's lessons reach new generations. The Naval Aviation Museum's flight simulators allow visitors to experience aerial combat from a Hellcat cockpit. Documentary films combine veteran interviews with computer-generated recreations of the battle. These programs transform statistics into human stories. The turkey shoot accelerated military aviation development. The battle proved that radar-directed fighters could create an impenetrable defense against conventional attack. This lesson influenced Cold War strategic planning, leading to sophisticated integrated air defense systems. The proximity fuse technology pioneered in 1944 evolved into modern smart weapons. The principle of detonating munitions near targets without requiring direct hits underlies everything from surface-to-air missiles to contemporary air defense systems. Fighter direction techniques developed for the turkey shoot became the foundation for modern air traffic control. The same principles of radar tracking, vectoring, and centralized control that destroyed Japanese air power now safely guide millions of civilian flights annually. The emphasis on pilot survivability seen in the Hellcat influenced all subsequent American military aircraft design. Every modern American fighter incorporates extensive armor, redundant systems, and escape mechanisms that trace their heritage to lessons learned in the Pacific. The Great Marianas turkey shoot represented more than tactical victory. It demonstrated that modern warfare had become a contest of systems rather than individual courage. Superior technology, training, logistics, and intelligence created conditions where bravery alone could not prevail. Admiral Mitcher's after-action report stated simply, "The enemy's carrier aviation has been destroyed." That destruction came through the convergence of American industrial might, technological innovation, and human skill. 12 hours of combat on June 19, 1944, eliminated Japanese naval aviation as an offensive force. In the depths of the Philippine Sea, 3 Japanese carriers rest on the ocean floor, their aircraft still in hangars that would never again launch strikes. But the true destruction occurred in the sky, where over 400 Japanese aircraft and their irreplaceable crews met their end against American Hellcats. The disparity was final and irreversible. Japan began June 19th with hopes of a decisive victory that might stall the American advance. They ended it with their carrier aviation effectively eliminated, their strategic position hopeless, and their homeland exposed to the strategic bombing that would culminate in atomic destruction. The turkey shoot was not just a battle. It was the moment when technological superiority, training excellence, and industrial capacity converged to create an insurmountable advantage. The age of the samurai aviator had ended, replaced by an era where systematic superiority determined outcomes. Lieutenant Alexander Vrachiu's 6 fingers held up to Admiral Mitcher became the battle's enduring image. A young pilot's triumph captured in a moment of joy. But behind that gesture lay the fuller truth. American pilots flying American aircraft, supported by American technology and logistics, had achieved what no amount of Japanese courage could overcome. The Hellcat had lived up to its name, bringing hell from above to those who challenged American naval power. In 8 brutal hours, Grumman's sturdy fighter had transformed the Pacific War's trajectory. The plane that some called the aluminum tank had proven that survivability and firepower trumped agility and finesse. June 19, 1944, marked the end of Japan as a carrier power and the beginning of American naval aviation's absolute dominance of the Pacific skies. That dominance would continue through the war's end and establish the template for carrier aviation that endures to this day. The lessons learned in those desperate hours above the Philippine Sea, the importance of training, technology, and systematic superiority, remain relevant in an age of stealth fighters and precision weapons. The Turkey Shoot stands as history's most one-sided aerial battle, a day when American naval aviation reached its zenith while Japanese carrier aviation met its destruction. In the span of a single tropical day, the Pacific War's outcome became inevitable. The empire of the rising sun had been eclipsed by the wings of democracy, and the path to Tokyo Bay lay open across the vast Pacific Ocean.